Hi, guys. I wanted to share a couple thoughts that occurred to me while walking Bowie today. Basically, I've actually thought about putting together a little series of dog walking epiphanies because when I'm walking Bowie, I often listen to spiritual content or just inspiring content of some kind while walking. But inevitably, I always need to stop and abort what I'm listening to and quickly take an audio note because the way my mind works, I always am germinating on the concepts that I'm hearing for the first time and learning or sort of, reconsidering. And I always want to synthesize them and then hopefully, obviously, step into new territory or come up with a new thought form or paradigm. And then I want to record it because, whether it ends up in an essay at some point or a book or not, I just like to record it because I frankly think that's kind of, in a way, what we're here for, is to take thought forms and paradigms to the next level and then contribute them back into the noosphere. I would argue, as I've said before, that we're all here to aid in the propagation of the species by contributing back into the collective, the transformation of individuals, and then by extension, the evolution of the species. And some of us are here to do that in the realm of ideas. So I try to, honor what I see as a little bit of a calling or a mission or a purpose to do exactly that. I don't think we're all philosophers, but I do think we're all creative beings, and that arguably each generation does, whether it's express or not, come up with new thought forms and paradigms that then, whether it's through social reform or policy or just actually that which drives all world events, which is the overriding philosophy of the planet at any given time. Anyway, so basically I was listening to Eckhart Tolle this morning, as I often do. And it was a live event, but somebody had it sort of written in and Eckhart was fielding written questions. And I think this particular, if I remember correctly, this particular individual said, on page 130, he even remembered the page and said, you speak about the pain body, which is a concept that Eckhart speaks a lot about. And he said, in your book, you said that many of us have an addiction to negative thinking. How can you help me out of my addiction to negative thinking? So it was interesting because I could have predicted it. I know Eckhart's writings very well. So I guess I think I know his, did that freeze? Anyway, I think I know his worldview pretty well. So it didn't surprise me too much that Eckhart quickly acknowledged that there is a chemical corollary with thoughts and feelings. He quickly acknowledged that, yes, there is a chemical component that correlates with thoughts and feelings. He didn't say that there are neurotransmitters, specifically peptides, to which we can become addicted that correlates with his concept of the pain body. He didn't speak much about, or at all, about cortisol or adrenaline, which are the fear chemicals that accompany the negative thought forms. So that's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit. He quickly went into his concept of the pain body, which is awesome. And my point is, which is more helpful? Is it helpful to talk about neural circuits that just fire and fire unless we disentangle them? Is it helpful to talk about the mechanistic level or the empirical level of all of this? Is it helpful to label it an addiction? Or is it more helpful to think of it in spiritual terms using a metaphor like the pain body, which is more empowering to the free will of the individual, put it that way. So that's why I say these thoughts are about holism. I just connected a bunch of dots, but they all have to do with the mind-body-spirit connection and how much importance we put on any one of those lenses through which we see a given situation. And in this situation, this situation is the idea of being addicted to negative thinking. So again, you could think of negative thinking as succumbing to a low-level PTSD. If all day, every day, we have experiences on the planet that our mind quickly assesses as threats or opportunities, and then makes the choice whether or not to map them on the worldview based on whether they were highly emotional experiences, right? We will be triggered down the line because that's the whole purpose of the mapping, right? Is to identify threats and opportunities and give a sort of database that serves as a framework for future scenarios that are similar. I think it depends on the brain of the individual. If you have a very mechanistically minded or empirically minded individual, they're probably going to respond more treating it like an addiction and finding out a scientific method to tackle it. Of course, AA is both. It has a spiritual component and it acknowledges the chemical addiction factor. But I guess I'm leaning toward thinking of things in terms of spiritual lingo, because that way we acknowledge that our free will is exactly what's meant to dovetail with the empirical level. Let me give you a better example. DNA is the blueprint, right? It's just the blueprint. More and more, epigenetics is acknowledging that all day, every day, our cells are creating, they're self-creating, right? There is some kind of non-local, in my world, non-local consciousness or intelligence driving those little proteins around for the cell to self-create. We all know a stem cell can become any number of tissues, but once it decides what kind of cell it's going to become, it continues to create all day, every day, based on little tiny proteins that are moving around, and nobody really talks about what's moving them around. In my world, it's non-local communication of intelligence. So the point is, epigenetics very much acknowledges that what we do during our lifetimes, yes, our thought forms and feelings, they tend to talk about diet, exercise, lifestyle choices, things that are more quantifiable. But of course, the chemical balances we stabilize in our bodies and become addicted to based on homeostasis, those chemical balances are 100% a product of our thoughts and feelings. So it's really interesting that people really resist this idea that even health can be the result of thoughts or feelings. It's kind of a no-brainer. Holism is really not new, and it's logic. So every thought can produce an emotion and vice versa. It's reciprocal. Thought can produce an emotion, which is really just a heightened physiological state. If you agree with that much, then it shouldn't be that much of a leap to say, well, that cortisol or adrenaline doesn't just pass. We don't just shake it off like a duck. The unique thing about humans is that we continue to carry around stress as chronic stress. And some people are better at shaking it off than others. But the point is, if we do experience heightened emotion as a result of a thought, our body really doesn't know the difference between a real threat, like a predator we might have encountered in the jungle during our day, versus something our mind simply invented. The chemicals that are produced are the same regardless. Another dot I connected to is that an empirical view of this, acknowledging the blueprint of DNA, but not acknowledging the epigenetic part, is the equivalent of sort of saying fate and destiny is hardwired without realizing that humans are wired to co-create with that blueprint. Our free will is meant to dovetail with fate or destiny as written. So again, I made the connection that an empirical or mechanistic stance is the equivalent of sort of Aristotelian thinking. I believe the difference between Platonic thinking, meaning Plato, and Aristotelian thinking is that Plato considered the essence of things, the form of things that transcended the flux and the appearance of things, whereas Plato was really into facts, figures, things that are quantifiable and definitive and can be measured, if that makes sense. And it's really easy to miss, right, the essence of things or the overriding forms when you're focused on particulars. It's almost like not seeing the forest for the trees. So now I want to tie it back into the creative realm a little bit, and because I'm a writer, I want to tie it back into some of my literary classics that were my favorites as a child. So if you guys remember Le Petit Prince, that's one of my favorites, and it's of course a children's classic the world over. Another writer that I loved as a child was Norton Juster. If you've ever read The Fountain Tollbooth, then you know who he is. These are stories that were not only about something universal in the human condition, but specifically they spoke on a really profound level about the nature of existence in the physical realm. They really spoke about metaphysics. So with Le Petit Prince, you may recall that the adults are always interested in labeling things. What is your friend's name? How many siblings does he or she have? They're really into numbers and data and things that are quantifiable, whereas children just experience the essence of things without having to label them. It's a huge theme in Le Petit Prince. In fact, I don't want to misquote it, but I think one of the passages literally says, all that is essential is invisible to the eye. So that to me correlates 100% with the empirical mindset, the mechanistic mindset versus the more holistic mindset, which could arguably be said to be our essential state. In addition to the theme of like retaining the innocence of childhood while coming of age, sort of maintaining imagination and creativity while graduating from childhood to adulthood, it's much deeper than that for me. I believe the pilot and the little prince himself represented not just innocence, but our soul minus mind and ego, our core consciousness minus the self, the me, the I, all those ego mind-driven identifiers that actually hijack us away from our core essence. So again, there's a million words for our core essence, but like our baseline consciousness, our awareness, our present moment awareness, our souls. So I think it really spoke volumes about the nature of existence in the metaphysical realm. And anyway, hopefully you follow me a little bit that empiricism versus rationalism, the idea of counting the empirical, quantifiable, definitive data in life, which is very different than experiencing the essence of things, the form of things on a, beyond a conceptual level, on a fundamental level. Those correlate 100%. And then I think they all have value. But again, going back to our original example, if you wanted to treat your own addiction to negative thinking, of course, you can do, positive affirmations. You can meditate to simply allow those neural circuits to disentangle, to create room for new thought forms and paradigms. But I do think thinking of it as a chemical addiction may not be as helpful as using a metaphor like the pain body, like Eckhart Tolle's pain body, because that engages your free will. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Hopefully there's something in there worthwhile. Take care, guys.